Imagine a time when pepper was worth more than gold, when spices could buy kingdoms, and when a single trading voyage could transform a merchant into a titan of industry. In London's narrow streets, while the Spanish and Dutch grow fat on foreign treasures, ambitious men gather in candle-lit rooms to dream of Indian riches. It was in this era that one man would rise from the grime of Fleet Street to command the most powerful trading company in history. Josiah Child, a mere brewer's son, would forge an empire through sheer force of will and ruthless ambition, amassing a fortune so vast it made nobles tremble. But even after he had exploited the British Empire's limitless hunger for exotic goods, building a personal wealth that would equal billions today, his descendants would prove that great fortunes are easier to inherit than maintain. Through their story of dizzying success and spectacular collapse, we witness how 3 generations can transform a family from London's merchant class to England's highest nobility, and then scatter their legacy to the winds. In today's episode, we uncover the rise and fall of the Child dynasty, where ambition, greed, and the intoxicating power of unlimited wealth created an empire that changed the world, only to vanish almost without a trace. In the dying years of the 16th century, Europe's heart beat for gold, and the spice trade was a brutal arena where empires risked everything for supremacy. Pepper, at 5 shillings an ounce, wasn't just spice, it was power, a prize that gripped Venetian merchants with fevered longing and pushed kings to gamble their crowns. Spain hauled £2 million of gold from the Americas yearly by 1590, a fortune that mocked England's empty vaults, while Portugal grew fat on Asia's spice routes. The Dutch, driven by a restless hunger, launched their East India Company in 1602, reaping £2 million a year by decade's end from the Spice Islands' bounty. This Dutch giant was a joint stock marvel, its shares a lifeline for men who dreamed of nutmeg-stained riches, its ships a terror to rivals. England ached to join the feast, its treasury a hollow echo, its merchants small and scrambling, their hopes pinned on a trade they couldn't reach alone. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I, her reign waning, signed a charter that birthed the English East India Company, a desperate bid to fight back. 24 merchants scraped together £72,000, their wool profits and borrowed coins a fragile shield against the Dutch titan. Theirs was no ordinary venture but a joint stock creation, a pact where every investor's fate hung on the same perilous thread, success or ruin. It was England's answer to a crushing need: how to fund voyages to Asia when one storm could sink a man's entire world. With pooled wealth, the company could arm ships and hire crews, a fighting chance against the Dutch and Portuguese, whose navies crushed lone traders like insects. The charter gave it teeth, permission to trade, sail and kill, offering a nation on its knees a shot at the wealth slipping through its fingers. These men didn't just want profit, they craved pepper to spice their drab lives, calicoes to drape their shivering poor, a taste of glory to call their own. But the odds were grim. Ships vanished in raging seas, sailors died clawing at empty rations, and enemies waited with cannon and cold steel. In 1612, the company's gamble roared to life off Surat, where Red Dragon and Hector, bristling with 38 cannon, faced Portuguese carracks in a desperate clash. English guns thundered, wood splintered, and blood stained the waves as they drove the Portuguese back, claiming a foothold on Mughal soil. Emperor Jahangir, in Agra's gilded halls, traded a factory for silver, a small victory born of grit and guile. By the 1620s, £1 million in profit flowed from calicoes and spices, a lifeline for a nation starved for hope. Forts rose, Madras in 1640, Bombay in 1668, bastions for a dream taking root. Into this furnace of want and will, Josiah Child, a brewer's son from Fleet Street, would step, his own hunger primed to seize the day. This was the forge of fortune, where the East India Company fought to turn England's yearning into power. Amid the clang of barrels on Fleet Street, Josiah Child was born in 1630 or 1631, a brewer's son with no silver spoon but a glint of iron in his soul. His father, Richard, eked out a living in London's grime, while his mother, Elizabeth, nursed dreams too frail for the city's crush, yet their boy burned with a fiercer want. Apprenticed young, he learned the ledger's cold arithmetic, but the narrow world of ale couldn't cage the ambition clawing at his chest. By his mid-20s, he broke free to Portsmouth, where the Commonwealth's navy hungered. Here, he shoveled beer and bread to sailors, his first taste of profit bitter with salt. Navy contracts piled coin into his hands, each shilling a whisper of the power he craved, until the East India Company's siren call reached his ears. In 1677, he stormed its court of directors, a chamber of velvet-clad wolves off Leadenhall Street, their eyes narrowing at this upstart who dared to belong. By 1681, he seized the governor's chair, a throne of trade where his voice cracked like a whip over men who'd once sneered at his name. Child wasn't content to count coins. He wielded ideas, his brief observations a battle cry that nations thrived on exports, colonies their lifeblood, gold their strength. Under his grip, the company surged, £1,500,000 yearly, sometimes £2 million, its ships heaving with silk, spice, and the sweat of distant lands. Bombay, a sodden gift from Charles II's Portuguese bride, became his obsession, a swamp he vowed to crown with stone and cannon. He poured wealth into its walls, turning a mire into a fortress, a defiant stake in India's soil that mocked the storms battering its shores. Then, in 1686, he hurled the company into the Anglo-Mughal War, a reckless plunge, 2,000 muskets, warships slicing the sea, to challenge Aurangzeb's empire. Bombay burned under Mughal retaliation, its skies thick with smoke, but Child stood unyielding, his jaw clenched against the chaos. The war sputtered out by 1690, a bruised peace forged, yet he'd secured Bombay's future, its scars a testament to his iron will. His fortune swelled, £200,000, a sum that made nobles blanch, as John Evelyn spat venom at this suddenly moneyed man. His daughter's £50,000 dowry lashed his blood to the Duke of Beaufort's line, a rope from Brewer's alley to aristocratic halls. Child bent Charles II and James II to his whims, a merchant who ruled kings, his shadow lengthening with each victory. The company wasn't just his tool, it was his empire, a beast he rode to heights no brewer's son should dream. Yet every crown he touched trembled, every gain a seed of strain, as power's cost loomed over his triumph. This was Josiah Child's forge, where ambition met opportunity, crafting a legacy his heirs would inherit and unravel. By 1700, Josiah Child's death left the East India Company a titan unchained, no longer a merchant's venture, but a force with claws sunk deep into India's heart. 3,000 sailors manned its ships, 1,000 redcoats guarded its forts, and clerks scratched endless tallies, their ink mapping a dominion from Bombay to Calcutta. These weren't mere trading posts. Madras, Bombay, Calcutta pulsed as cities born of gunpowder, their streets alive with the company's relentless will. It coined silver rupees stamped with its crest, taxed villages until mud huts stood empty, and built courts where English law smothered local cries for justice. By 1740, its army ballooned to 10,000, outstripping Britain's own in India, its revenue hitting £3 million, a flood that drowned London's counting houses. This was power raw and sprawling, a beast Child had fed but could no longer steer, its hunger now its own master. In 1757, the clash at Plassey marked its zenith. Robert Clive, a clerk turned predator, slipped £2,000 to a traitor and led 3,000 men to topple Bengal's Nawab. The loot, £2,500,000, rattled into its vaults, but the Diwani, Bengal's tax rights, poured in £4 million yearly by 1765. Tea flooded England's hearths, a comfort to the weary. Opium, 30,000 chests by 1800, choked China's ports, a poison that lined British pockets. Nabobs swaggered home, their fortunes, like Clive's £500,000, buying estates and votes, their gold-stained hands a taunt to the old guard. Yet beneath the glory festered rot. Greed turned men into monsters, their wealth built on bones bleaching in distant fields. The Bengal famine of 1770 gutted 10 million lives, rice rotting in company barns, while mothers clutched starving children outside locked gates. This wasn't oversight, but choice. Profit trumped mercy, and the company's ledgers gleamed while India wept. Parliament recoiled. Its Regulating Act of 1773 and Pitt's India Act of 1784 chaining the beast with rules it loathed. Profits shrank, £1 million by 1780 as French frigates harried its ships and Mysore's rockets pierced its pride. The company's army grew, its forts hardened, but its soul softened, corrupted by men who saw India as a trough to gorge upon. Child's heirs, Richard, John and beyond, lived in this shadow, their Wanstead halls echoing with a wealth Josiah had birthed, but they couldn't grasp. The company had become a paradox, a ruler without a crown, a trader turned tyrant, its strength a brittle shell over a hollow core. Every chest of tea, every opium pipe carried the weight of lives crushed, 10 million ghosts whispering through its gains. This was the monster unleashed, a legacy of Child's ambition now spiraling beyond control, its roar drowning out the cries it left behind. Richard Child, born 1680 to Josiah's third wife Emma, stepped into the baronetcy in 1704, a young man cradling a legacy forged in his father's iron will. He carried no brewer's scars, Eton and Oxford had polished him, but his blood thrummed with a hunger for grandeur, not the gritty trade Josiah mastered. In 1715, he razed Wanstead's old hall, pouring £100,000 into a Palladian palace, its 6 Corinthian columns a boast to England's elite. The East India Company, Josiah's engine, still churned, £2,500,000 from Plassey in 1757, yet Richard turned to rents, not shares. By 1750, when he died, its profits dipped to £500,000 yearly, strained by French wars and Mysore's rockets, a tide he ignored. He wed Dorothy Glynn, her Tilney estates a golden vein, and became first Earl Tilney in 1731, a title stitched from land, not sea. His Wanstead gleamed, Hogarth painted its balls, nobles danced in its halls, but no sons carried his name, only daughters to mourn his end. Richard was no Josiah. He built beauty, not empires, leaving the company's roar a distant echo as his 1750 death passed the torch. Decades rolled, and the family's thread stretched to Catherine Tilney Long, born 1789, granddaughter of Richard's sister Emma, heiress to a crumbling dream. At 16, her brother's death made her England's richest commoner, Wanstead's splendour and Josiah's ghost hers to hold or lose. In 1812, she married William Pole, a rake with £80,000 of debt, his charm a snare, his greed a flame to her fortune. Napoleon's wars, 1803 to 1815, choked the company's trade, rents falling to £7,000 a year, yet William spent like a king. He threw parties costing £5,000 a night, £60,000 on furnishings, while the company's India monopoly died with the Charter Act of 1813. By 1822, creditors circled. Wanstead's treasures, marble and silk, fetched £40,000 at auction, a pittance for their worth. In 1824, the house itself crumbled, its stones sold for £10,000, a golf course's dip all that remained of Josiah's vision. Catherine's ruin was stark. She died in 1825-36, her eyes hollow, her son's earldom a husk fading by 1884. The company too waned. Its China trade ended in 1833, a shadow of Josiah's beast, ruling India for a crown that despised it. Richard had gilded the legacy, Catherine burned it, her husband's waste a mirror to the company's excess. This was the heir and the prodigal, one who shaped a monument, one who torched it, tied to a company sliding from glory to dust. Catherine Tilney Long's death in 1825 marked the dynasty's breaking point, her Wanstead reduced to rubble, Josiah Child's dream a whisper in the wind. Her son, William, 4th Earl of Mornington, inherited a title but no substance, his 1884 death snuffing out the Tilney line with a whimper. The East India Company, too, staggered toward its grave, its India monopoly gone by 1813, its China trade dead by 1833. By 1857, its 250,000 troops faced the mutiny, sepoys turning British guns on British throats, blood soaking India's plains. The Crown seized control in 1858, dissolving the company into a bureaucratic husk, its roar silenced after 258 years. Josiah's vision, £2 million yearly in the 1880s, had birthed this beast, but his heirs watched it and their legacy crumbled to dust. Side branches of the family flickered briefly, their stories faint shadows against the dynasty's core collapse. Elizabeth Child, Josiah's daughter from his first wife, wed John Howland in 1656, her line fading into Essex obscurity, untouched by Wanstead's glow. From his second wife, Mary, came Josiah II, who took the baronetcy in 1699 but died childless in 1704, a dead end at 37. Mary Child, Richard's sister, bore John Tilney, 2nd Earl from 1750, whose Naples exile and scandal, £10,000 squandered on art, left no heirs. Emma Child, another of Richard's sisters, married Sir Robert Long, birthing James Tilney Long, 3rd Earl in 1784, a quiet man whose only son died young. James's daughter Catherine became the prodigal, but his other girls, Dorothy and Emma, lived modestly, their £50,000 dowries scattering to lesser names. Dorothy wed Sir Philip Tilney, her life a footnote in Wiltshire. Emma faded into spinsterhood, her share of Josiah's gold a quiet burial. The company's end mirrored this unravelling, its £3 million peak in 1740 a memory, its nabob's £500,000 fortunes a taunt to its ruin. Wanstead's fall in 1824, £10,000 for its stones, left a dip in Epping Forest, a grave for a dynasty once mighty. Josiah's £200,000 empire had lifted his kin to earldoms, but their grip slipped as the company's did, undone by excess and time. Side heirs like John and James held titles briefly, their £10,000 rents no match for the 18th century's storms. The mutiny's echoes in 1857 were the company's dirge, just as Catherine's loss was the family's, both felled by their own weight. This was the end. Josiah's beast and bloodline extinguished, side branches withering, a legacy of power now a scar on the earth. The forge of fortune cooled, leaving only ruins where ambition once burned bright. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. What is your opinion on the history of the British Empire? Is it an embarrassment, or is it something that actually made the world better, and people are just too negative about its story? We can't wait to hear your thoughts, and with that said, thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Luxury. Cheers, until the next one.